Gooseworx, you better have a reservation for a damn good spot in hell. It's so cringe how Goose is out here forcing Jax just because he's her favourite. Forcing such a trash character is literal insanity. Jax is an abuser. Why is he one of the main characters now? These are real comments, left by real people attacking the creator of a show for an obvious and benign statement. This is the state the Digital Circus fandom has come to. Right, so I was in the middle of scripting a drama-free, standard video about the reasons behind why the Digital Circus could have been created by CNA. Unfortunately, it will have to wait, as something has come up over the last weekend that has pushed me over the edge into talking about this. However, despite the incredible levels of disgust and rage that I feel towards certain individuals we will be talking about today, this video is going to stay as unbiased as possible, delivering the facts and the timeline of what happened. The drama last weekend started when Gooseworx offhandedly said during a stream that Jax and Pomni were the main characters of the Amazing Digital Circus, with the deliberate exclusion of Ragatha from that list. A group of mainly Ragatha fans, including shippers, because of course they were, got rather angry at this information and began harassing Goose both publicly and likely via DM as well. Goose chose to respond to some of this hate for the original announcement by posting this on a Reddit thread which has now been deleted along with the Reddit accounts. Seeing that, Vivian Medrano, creator of the Hell of a Boss and Has Been Hotel series, jumped into Goose's defense, calling out the people attacking the original comment and then moving to a general defense of female creators. Finally, on Monday, Goose released another statement apologizing for previous actions, with clarification that it was in reference to the Reddit thread comment rather than the original post. Glitch Productions then unofficially ended the scuffle by releasing their own statements, calling for the celebration of the good parts of the fandom rather than focusing on the bad, as they are what makes the show great, with added context that since the initial outburst, Goose has received lots of supportive comments as well. In and about this, we have a collection of posts from Goose with some creative insults for her haters, and this reply from Matt Brady, creator of the popular Disney cartoon Amphibia, stating that a comment he made regarding his own show received similar feedback online. Now, before we get into any of the insult throwing or anything else that's happened, we need to examine the central tenet of this drama. Are Jax and Pomni the main characters of this show, and more importantly, is Ragatha not? There are a number of factors to determine the main character status of a cast member, but I will be going with 3 indicators, 2 based on data and 1 based on my personal opinion: screen time, merchandise, and plot relevance. The screen time of each character has thankfully been catalogued by YouTuber Mr. Mickman, where we can see that Pomni has by far the most screen time at 1 hour and 23 minutes, followed by Jax at a clean hour and then Ragatha at 46 minutes. In isolation, these numbers seem to suggest that Ragatha could be classed as a main character along with the other two due to the comparatively bigger gap between Jax and Pomni, our obvious main protagonist. When you zoom out, however, we see that Ragatha's screen time lines up roughly with that of Gangle and Kinga, definite side characters. Adding on to that, the fact that Jax's screen time is increasing at a faster rate than Ragatha's, and the evidence here would suggest that Jax is serving more of a main character role alongside Pomni, with Ragatha reduced to a more secondary role. But then there's the obvious rebuttal to this of quality over quantity, in that just because a character has less screen time doesn't mean they can't be classed as a main character. Perhaps the writing just allows them to do more with less time. So let's take a look at plot relevance to see if we can confirm this theory. Jax's relevance to the plot is quite easy to see. He's in direct conflict with the rest of the cast because he doesn't seem to actually want to leave the circus behind. I wouldn't go as far as to call him the villain of the story, as this is more a PvE than a PvP one, but he is the main competitor to Pomni for most of the show. Clearly a main character. Ragatha, on the other hand, is less clear-cut. Near the start of the series, she fills a mentor role. Then it transitions to a friendship fallout after the stupid sauce gets in her eye, and then they make up during the gap between episodes 6 and 7. It's likely this decision right here that relegates Ragatha to less of a main character than Jax. If there was more time involving this specific interaction, there would be a genuine case for Ragatha as the third central character. However, because her dispute is resolved off-camera, that doesn't get to happen. I feel as though once the last 2 episodes are here and we look back on the series, it'll be pretty clear to see that Ragatha is more of a mentor character than Pomni than a central character in her own rights. Finally, we have the merch, and these are pretty straightforward numbers. Pomni has 33 pieces of merch featuring her, Jax has 31, and Ragatha only has 21. In every way you cut it, Jax and Pomni are clearly more central to the show than Ragatha is. Therefore, we can say that the initial statement from Goose was truthful and justified. Now we have to delve back into the sludge with a lesson on media literacy. The textbook definition for this term is the ability to analyze, evaluate, and act upon forms of digital communication. In this case, we're specifically looking at the ability to analyze the meanings and intentions of Gooseworx and the Digital Circus in in general, and then how to respond appropriately to what you garner. In fact, this is what we've just done by proving that Ragatha is not a third main character in the show, the use of critical thinking and gathering information about a topic to create an informed conclusion. It is only once we have done this that meaningful conversation and critique can happen. Of course, people on the internet do not often want to do this. Instead, they choose to only see the surface comment, guess that it doesn't align with their own beliefs, and call whoever said the comment a variety of names, instead of reassessing their own opinions. This is fundamentally bad for any fandom, and in the Digital Circus it happens a lot. Remember how at the start of this video I said that this controversy is what finally pushed me over the edge to make this video? Well, I have other drafts of other videos discussing Digital Circus based controversy that I haven't released because I realised the angrier tone I used for those scripts wasn't something I wanted to be known for. But nonetheless, this fandom is still full of drama that has caused a great deal of emotion from both me and others. And that is just from the perspective of a person on the sidelines. When you are the active target of abuse and bad faith criticism, it'll be much more stressful, which is likely what prompted Goose to make this comic on some relatively fair criticism. This Reddit response clapping back at the audience in a condescending tone is undoubtedly a bad thing to have published. Its passive-aggressive nature would only ever spark more controversy and more rebuttals from angry fans of the show who are already upset at you specifically. That being said, it is obvious why Goose has done this, and in her final response she says this as well. Having a large audience eyeing down your every move who are able to insult you and the project you've put lots of energy into without any fear of repercussion is draining, and it's why most creatives don't do it. I will come back to this point later, but wanting to engage more with the community necessarily means that you'll see more criticism from that community. And that brings us to another lesson in media literacy: how to criticize something properly. First off, we must establish that the only reason a person would want to be publishing criticism on a piece of media is because they want to see change in that media. If they're not looking for that, then it's bad faith criticism. Whether this be talking about how a mechanic in a game sucks, the writing in a show sucks, or the use of specific sounds in music sucks, criticism is always fundamentally made as a way to incite change. Therefore, if a work is criticized without specifically pointing out what the problem is, or just leaving a blanket statement that thing bad, the criticism is done in bad faith and is unhelpful. I have no doubt that even in the comment section of this video, there will be bad faith criticism claiming this video is incorrect and calling me names without any proper elaboration. The next part of making sure a piece of criticism is done in good faith is the way in which it is delivered. Angry shouting, slurs, and ad hominem insults at the creator are not a good way to incite change in the media you're criticizing, because you just cause the creator to get defensive. That's not to say that you can't be animated in your language. If a part of a piece of media is extremely upsetting to you, it is fine to be emotional when describing it. Hell, I did that last week when talking about the Murder Drones comic, but there is a line between being animated and ranting, and it is very important not to cross it. I bring all this up because bad faith criticism can only be responded to in bad faith, as there's no reasonable discussion to be had once the original criticism is made. The creator and any supporters of the media can only call the criticizer the same insults that they were just called because that is all the original post gives them to work with. At this point, it's just a bunch of people yelling at each other over the internet, and nothing good can ever come of that. A bunch of people yelling at each other over the internet, however, is a fantastic catalyst to bring in more people to expand the argument even further, which is what we see with Viv and Matt. They jump to Goose's aid and immediately attempt to defend them from harassment, but they don't really have any points to focus on because the original criticism didn't give them anything to refute. So instead they have to expand the arguments, going into their own shows and beliefs about selective persecution on the internet that's only vaguely related and just ends up adding more fuel to the fire. It's at this point you might be thinking that I'm doing the same thing and adding even more fuel, and perhaps that may be the result of this once all is said and done, but the goal of this video is to try and steer this and any future conversations into an area of civil debates rather than angry shouting. And that leads me on to my final point, the way to never have this sort of thing happen within the fandom again. And it's really quite sad that I have to say this, but it's to not allow the creator to interact with fans online. The reason that the Digital Circus is covered up in controversy to the point where people from other fandoms take notice is because Goose talks to the fans directly all the time. People take every reply, every comment, and every repost of the creator of a popular show as something to be analysed and scrutinised, for better or for worse, depending on what you think of the media they made. Goose constantly talking to fans is like adding more and more gasoline into this dumpster and just hoping you don't accidentally drop a match in. And that is terrible, because the fans are the reason the show is made in the first place, as Glitch have said. Interacting with them should be a great time, but when you have a loud and angry minority, as the internet so often provides, that experience turns from extremely positive to extremely negative, to the point where the creator gets sick of both the fandom and the project in general. Finally, direct exposure to all of this internet attention and scrutiny has put a serious amount of strain on Goose's mental well-being. While I wouldn't dare take a chance at diagnosing her with anything from isolated tweets with very little context, there is a clear trend emerging where her recent posts have been getting more disgruntled and erratic. The human mind is not built to handle more than a few hundred people throughout our entire lives, so millions having access to you at once through the internet is heavily taxing, and a big part of this final important post. Goose tells us that she won't be touching the fandom again with a 10-foot pole, because they've pushed her away from it. She doesn't want to do it because she thinks that interacting with the fandom again will just cause more harm, as it has been shown to in the past. She'll finish episode 9 of the Amazing Digital Circus and then likely never touch the franchise again because of this. It's caused irreparable harm to both her mental well-being and to the fandom in general. I implore you to learn media literacy for yourself and not engage in bad faith arguments which will cause them to bubble to the surface, but for this show specifically, there's not really any future to save anymore. And that is how the Digital Circus fandom pushed Gooseworx away from their own show. Thank you all for watching, and have a good one.